Super. Well, thanks, Mikael, and thanks, Mark. I'm excited to be here today to talk about the Power BI activity log and REST APIs. So I'm a data architect, and I spend most of my time on Power BI governance and administration type of topics. If you like today's session, I have an extended workshop that you can find out about it on my website. The URL is down here at the bottom of the screen. I'll let you go investigate if you would like. Today, what we are talking about are the automation and the administrator type of capabilities with regard to the activity log primarily, and also the REST APIs, because it's really important to augment that data. And so what we're going to do is we're going to walk through starting with the what and the why. So kind of the slightly big picture. Why do we need this data? What can we do with it? Then we're going to shift gears into the how and do some technical demos. Then I'm going to leave you with some tips for getting started. And then, as they said, we will open it up to Q&A. In terms of getting the materials, you can find them on my website. So the short version is coatesds.com and on the presentations page. And then once you arrive at the presentations page, which is underneath community resources if you go the long way, this one is third on the list. And if we jump down to that, what I want to tell you is that not only can you update the slides, when the video link is updated, I will add that as well when it's available in a few weeks. And then there's also a notebook that you're going to see me demonstrate today. That's available here. The last couple hours, I've been having some issues, and I can't get this notebook to display as I would normally expect it to over in GitHub. So if I open that, yeah, nice. So there's a separate link right here for you. And so the main link's acting up. You should be able to get to it through that secondary link. Alrighty. You're also going to see a diagram here in just a moment. That's on a separate page, the diagrams page. So, all right. So in terms of scope for this session, the main focus that we have is about querying metadata. And really what we're focused on there are, data we can get related to activities inside the Power BI service. So what that means is we really have a boatload of stuff that's out of scope. And really the big one that I want to make the distinction is that first bullet point at the bottom left there about updating and managing content in the Power BI service. So what I'm really focused on here is getting that metadata out. So the querying side of things, if that makes sense. And then you're going to see some PowerShell syntax. We'll talk about that a little bit. It's my secondary focus. So when we get to Q&A, if you have more questions, we can certainly dive back through that. The demos that you're going to see, this is just a little bit of information for you if you wanted to try to step back through what I am doing. And so I'm essentially using a Azure Data Studio notebook, and I'm running PowerShell 7, and you'll understand why that is here in just a few minutes when we talk about that. And last thing is all the scripts you're going to see, much like every blog you read, really is that, they're not production ready. They're really demo scripts and that kind of thing for learning purposes. And so I like to make that clear that you need to actually do more work to make them production ready, right? Normally I would add things like error handling and logging and parameterization and, how we're going to securely handle passwords and secrets and all that kind of good stuff that isn't there because it would really make it more complex for learning purposes. Okay, so let's get started with really the what and the why of what we're talking about. And where I want to start really is kind of at the 10,000 foot level. And in every diagram you see the idea of adoption, governance, monitoring of Power BI. It's usually shown at the end of a diagram. And this one that I created a few months ago, and the link for it is at the bottom of the page here. Basically, what we tried to show here is that while various things are happening, the idea of understanding what's going on in your environment starts from the very beginning, or hopefully it does. And that we really need this Power BI metadata to make good informed decisions about how the system is being used while we iteratively do the work. So basically, create new solutions or migrate assets, etc. Now, the other thing that I want to illustrate is this is a diagram that's available on my website. I'm not going to go through it. It's very dense. The point of it really is to show all of the different capabilities that are available within the end-to-end ecosystem of Power BI. But within the red outline, that's really what we're focusing on in terms of getting out the metadata. So what's going on inside the Power BI service with regard to the activities that users are performing and how security is set up and all that sort of thing. So when you hear me say, we need to understand what's going on in the tenant, I mean your tenant in the Power BI service, which is really kind of just, one very important piece, but one piece of your overall end-to-end ecosystem. So with this metadata, there's 4 different areas that I tend to think of that we can do things with once we get this metadata. We can look at adoption and usage patterns, right? Understanding how people are really using the service. We can do an architecture overview and inventory, and that's about understanding, well, how many reports do I have and where do they exist and how many workspaces and all that kind of stuff. And then item 3, governance, security, compliance. And number 4, support user education. I'm going to give you some specific examples of what I mean by this. But what I want to call out right now is that really only number 3 here is that traditional oversight and control mentality. Really 1, 2, and 4 are really very much about understanding what the users are doing and, helping them do it better, supporting them. Now, before we go through examples of each of those 4 items, I need to do a quick aside because when we start talking about adoption and usage, we need to really clarify what do we mean by adoption. And so if somebody in your company is starting to throw around the word adoption, just because you're seeing some usage in Power BI, what I want to do is, kind of hit a pause on that for a second. And the idea there is that more usage stats isn't always a positive thing. For example, do you want tons of duplicate data models or data sets? No, we do not. Do we want tons of downloads and exports? No, we do not. So it's not usage only. How I define adoption is we're using the technology, A, routinely as part of the job role, right? And that, of course, is usage, right? And continually increasing that usage. And then we want to use the technology as it was intended to be used. And you've all experienced this, right? You create a beautiful data model, a beautiful report, and if all people ever want to do is export the data out to Excel so they can go do their own thing, that's not as the solution was intended to be used. And so do we actually say Power BI adoption is achieved, right? And then the third piece is about in an optimal way to its fullest extent. And that tends to tie into learning and education for your user community so that they understand the best possible way to do things, which of course is hard because it's always changing all the time and growing and hard to keep up with. So when I talk about user adoption, I really mean a compilation of all those kinds of things. All right, so of those 4 items, if we start with number 1, I tend to also create some subcategories under the idea of adoption and usage patterns into these 5, A, B, C, D, and E. I'm going to only focus on the first 3 of them for the purpose of this talk because the last 2, learning, organizational awareness, that kind of data is important for measuring adoption, but it's not data we actually get out of Power BI. So for instance, before I leave them, just to give you the full picture, the 1D learning and continual improvement item, that's tracking things like who completed training and the engagement with your internal programs like your forums or lunch and learns and office hours, right? That kind of stuff's harder to track. And you probably need to set up something to make that happen. And then the last one, organizational awareness and engagement. What I mean by that is maybe you're doing some internal surveys, maybe you're monitoring communications, maybe you're doing some project tracking, right? So those two we're going to ignore. But the first three, let's first talk about usage and consumption, because that, of course, when we're talking about the Power BI activity log, that's the thing. So the first piece is really all about thinking about content views. And here, it could be any kind of content, or we could be saying users. So the first kind of metric that we might look at is what's our popular content? And that's really important so that we can make sure it's supported the way it should be. Or maybe you see something's being shared from My Workspace and it's suddenly getting dozens or hundreds of views per day. That's something that we need to take action on because that represents risk. Then we've got things like how much content do we have with active usage or frequent usage? And that brings us to defining some definitions that are associated with these different kinds of metrics. So you'll set these up for yourselves, but I tend to say if we have, say, reports with active usage, that means they're run at least once a month, or frequent might be once a week. And then I might use inactive or underutilized that maybe we haven't seen any activity in 3 months. Now, that's not a perfect system, of course, because a really important report might only be used twice a year, but it's still very important. So it's not perfect, but we might look at finding underutilized content or even abandoned content that can just be removed, or even just the usage is increasing every month, every quarter, every year once you get that much history built up. That sort of thing. And there might not be a goal. There might just be, we like to see it steady or an upward trend. And then the other piece of this is thinking really primarily about the users, and that's how many of our users actively publish content. That is, they are using their pro license. And then you've got users with an underutilized license, and that might be people that are only viewing content, or maybe they've never published anything to the Power BI service. And so if you are having issues with getting more Power BI Pro licenses approved and you need to divvy them up very, very carefully, this kind of data can be really important. So these are just a few of the top examples of usage metrics. If we move on to data trustworthiness, the second piece, the top thing that you really want to start looking at as you start maturing a Power BI organization is your ratio of data sets to reports. And that is telling you that, oh, what we want to see is a number of reports that are reusing a single data set. If you've gotten into a situation where all of your report authors aren't educated enough to know that they don't have to have a new data set for every report they publish, right, that leads itself into lots and lots of maintenance issues. And, I won't go down that rabbit hole. So that's kind of the number one thing we're looking for. And that then lends itself into data trustworthiness, because the less data we need to maintain, the more trustworthy it tends to be, because it's a little bit more controlled. Microsoft calls this discipline at the core, flexibility at the edge. And then we can start looking at, how much of our content is certified. And you may or may not actually have a goal here, but it's really interesting information to look at depending on what your goals are for getting content certified within certain domain areas. And then the last one is user experience. And I lump this under the umbrella of adoption because a lousy experience for users will directly impact your adoption. So for instance, your data refresh success, particularly for your certified data, you want that to be very, very, very high. I could see something like a 99% goal for refresh success on certified data sets, and something less is okay for the self-service BI content that's theoretically less critical, but doesn't mean that self-service BI content isn't very, very important as well. We might want to look at, unused objects in the workspace, and, is our gateway cluster running, because all those things can impact our user experience. The next piece, so going through those four things, right? Number two is basically just an architecture overview. So getting that inventory of what are all of the objects that we have, and being able to classify them, and then being able also to do some trending over time. So if you pull this data out and you store it, for instance, once a week, a snapshot, you could do counts trending over time to see what's changing. And that's really useful information, particularly when you combine it with the activity log. 3, things under the realm of governance, security, auditing, compliance. So workspace security by role is a very, very important one. I really like to pull that once a week, and that's a perfect example of combining it with the activity log data. I can't claim that we get 100% view into security these days because there are some gaps from the API perspective, but it gives us a good piece of information. So that's one of my favorite ones. We're going to see that in a demo here in just a couple minutes. Various security pieces of information. So what the activity is, if you can also get data from, say, Azure Active Directory, where what is the person's department, for instance, so then you can pick up if that person's role has changed over time when you're looking at snapshot to snapshot. And the goal there is you see that somebody transferred, but none of their security settings changed. That might be a problem. Getting licensing snapshots at a point in time. That also comes from the Microsoft Graph API, to be fair. But it coupled along with looking at the activity for who's publishing content, who's viewing content, is really useful information. Really focusing on what are your external users or your guest users doing if they have access to your Power BI tenant. You might do some specific auditing for just that. And I also like to see when we are also specifically auditing, what's a Power BI administrator doing? Because it's a very high privilege role. So trust but verify, and make sure that there is no abuse of the role occurring. And then we've got things like kind of related to, what we talked about here. Maybe if we've got people that have transferred, but we still have content that's owned by them, there's still contacts assigned, things like that. We can, when we start marrying up that data, we can do some very interesting reporting. Lastly, under support and user education, there are a whole lot of things that we can do here. So for instance, we see a whole lot of sharing from My Workspace, or we see a lot of report views occurring from My Workspace. To me, that represents risk because we don't want critical organizational content residing in someone's private area. If we see lots and lots of data sets being published by the same author, that might mean that they need some education, right? In how to reuse a data set, how to do a live connection, those kinds of things. We might be interested in looking at something like, we see a lot of build permissions and a lot of new activity happening on a data set and it's not certified. Are we concerned? Are we not? Just depends. It's still good information to know though. Kind of same idea with high report views on content that's not certified. Kind of depends on your goals for certified content. Lots of data refresh failures. That's a really good one because we might need to do some additional training, or we might need to actually change what data source is being used. If in fact, for instance, maybe there's an Excel data source that's being used, it keeps changing because somebody doesn't know best practices. That's what I'm driving at. Significant use of unsanctioned data sources. This may or may not be something you're concerned about. And that's around the idea of your organization might say, we strongly prefer that you source your data from this particular, data warehouse, reporting database, or whatever. And so the use of additional data sources might just be an FYI, and it might be more of an auditing item. And then things like, we see a lot of exports and printing and subscriptions that are being used in a way that we didn't exactly expect. So you can then take this kind of data that we have, which is just a goldmine of information, and without being big brother-like about it, contact users, offer them a link to more information, offer them a link to, here's our training on how to do X, Y, Z, and that might, and explain to them, here's how it might help you be more efficient or whatever. So in our first section, we just went through some ideas of what we can do with this Power BI metadata. What I want to do next is I want to shift gears into actually, let's run some queries. Let's look at what the data actually looks like. So before we do that, let me set the stage with a couple of things. When we're looking at, say, community blogs and YouTube videos and that kind of stuff, with the exception of a few items that have been published recently, and I've got a whole bunch of links at the end of this that I'm going to review with you. So I'll point them out. But a lot of blogs just kind of show a very basic solution. And that's, let's just pull the data into, a Power BI data set. And there's some various limitations with this. This is a very good learning exercise, but it doesn't store historical data or anything like that. So I would use something like this as a learning exercise with the goal of evolving over time to something that's a little bit more end-to-end. So you have here in the middle some mechanism to schedule your scripts. This could be just PowerShell sitting on a virtual machine that's running PowerShell scripts, or it could be in Azure running, say, in Azure Functions or Azure Automation or even Azure Data Factory, right? There's a bunch of different ways that you could architect this. So for right now, let's just think theoretically we're scheduling various scripts. And the first thing that we're interested in getting are the activity events. Some people also call it the audit log. Same thing. That is the number one priority. And if you're not currently obtaining this data, that's your top priority to at least start accumulating this data. And then once you've got that in hand, there are some REST APIs, and there's a lot of them. And we can get various pieces of information like that workspace inventory and workspace security roles that we talked about briefly a couple minutes ago. We can also start getting other pieces of information about what's going on in our tenant. Then once you've got that under control, you want to start going after data from Microsoft Graph. And that's where we're going to get things like our user information. And the reason that's important, for instance, in the Power BI activity events, we only get an email address. I don't get a full name. I don't get what department this person works in. So you can see the value of getting some user information out of Azure Active Directory, which would come from Microsoft Graph. Or at least I should say these days, Microsoft Graph is the best place to source that information. Group memberships. So let's say over from this API, you are getting your workspace roles and you're using some security groups. Well, when you pull it from the APIs, it's not going to tell you, oh, these 24 users are a member of that group. No, you've got to go get that separately. And then, things like Power BI licenses, who's in my administrator roles, other miscellaneous things like that. And then the last thing, kind of the lowest priority, at least for most companies, is starting to then weave in the gateway information. And there's some really interesting data available from those gateway logs. So what you want to do is you want to accumulate the information. And, for purposes of this conversation, really let's focus on these top two at the left. Those are the big two where you want to start. What you want to do is you want to accumulate that information in something where you can drop in the raw JSON files. That could be a data lake like Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2. Could be just a regular Azure storage account, like blob storage. It could even be your file system. I don't care. Just as long as you are picking up the raw JSON files. Then what you want to do is you want to have something, and this could be like an Azure SQL database, or it could just be another area of your data lake where you're actually curating and preparing the data. And the reason that this middle spot is really useful is because the activity event data isn't perfectly clean, so it gives you a chance to do some cleanup. It also gives you a chance to create those historical snapshots, like those weekly inventories over time, that sort of thing. And then, of course, we're going to lay Power BI on top of it to do our reporting. So I think this middle one right here, regardless of how you architect it, it's really, really important to make the Power BI side as easy as possible from a reporting perspective. So then the last piece to introduce you to is that the reports, you can absolutely allow your end users to view them, for their department or whatever, use row level security if you need to. And then the raw data back here is usually considered kind of the kitchen and only accessed by your auditors and your administrators. So all that kind of data that we said we want to evolve to getting to, and I hinted at this at the very beginning with, the 4 categories, the same sets of data is used for user adoption and auditing and monitoring. And, what you actually think of as adoption and what you actually think of as auditing is probably going to differ a little bit between those of you that are listening to this. But I think of user adoption as about empowerment, improvement, learning, helping, and auditing and monitoring is usually, to me, more about governance and control. And we need to have, that really nice balance of both. So you might have multiple target users for this data because it's used for multiple angles of things. And thus, just another reason I want to justify that having kind of that decent data model that pulls the data together, for the reporting is a really useful thing to do. All right, so let's talk about first, before we start running PowerShell scripts, let's just look at the data the simplest possible way that we can. And where I'm at is in the newer Microsoft 365 Compliance Center, and I'm on the audit page. And this is the user interface for looking for all types of unified audit log data for the organization. So this particular page requires pretty high privilege permissions. If you are just a Power BI administrator and you don't have like global admin rights, you're not gonna be able to do this. But I still want to show you the one and only GUI that we have here. Well, it's not the one and only. Technically, we have cloud app security as well if you send the data there. But I don't really use that for this purpose. So I'm going to kind of focus on this one. If I do a search for Power, what it's going to do is it's going to list the Power BI activities here for me. And at last count, we had something like 130 or 140 different activities logged by the Power BI service. And as you can imagine, with changes that happen every single week, that just gets more and more all the time. Notice that I cannot just with one click say, give me all of the Power BI activities. We have to choose them one by one. So even if you were willing to hop in here, say once a week and click the button and export the data and get all your Power BI activities, you can't. This system, it's not meant for that. This is meant for little onesie twosie ad hoc kind of queries. So let's say I'm curious who's been changing sensitivity labels. So I just did a search for the first part of the word. I've got 3 different types of activities that are logged related to sensitivity labels. And I'm going to go back a little bit earlier. This is my demo system. So, data gets a little spotty, right? Depending on what I'm doing when. And it's a little bit subtle, but it tells us right down here that it's working. And when it comes back, we are going to see that I've got a couple of different activities that happened. One is I applied a sensitivity label. One is I changed a sensitivity label. So if I take a look at this one, what this is doing is it's taking the underlying JSON and it's displaying the key value pairs here in a nice human readable format. And we're going to see this in a little bit even more raw format here in a moment. But this particular activity is sensitivity label changed. And then, I get various things about it, right? So this happened to be performed on a data flow. So I get the ID, the name, and the type. The thing is that the attributes that you see down here are going to differ each based on what the actual activity is that was captured. Basically, to rephrase that, the key value pairs change for every activity, meaning I need a flexible schema. All right, so this is the one super easy way to do ad hoc views of the data, but that's not very practical. So let's talk about going after the data programmatically. You have two different ways to do this. One is using some PowerShell modules, and the other is going after the APIs. So let's talk about the PowerShell modules first. There are two of them that are published by Microsoft. For this talk, I am not focusing on anything that is published by a third party, but there is, certainly some things out there, as you can imagine. There is the Power BI management module, and that's kind of the biggie. That's the main one. And then there's a secondary data gateway module that is published separately from all of the rest. And you can think of the PowerShell modules as an obfuscation layer over the APIs. So the PowerShell modules make it a little bit simpler to obtain the data versus going after the APIs directly. Now, if we do go after the APIs, there's three types. There's the admin APIs, there's the user APIs, and then there's embedding APIs, which, we're not talking about at all today. But when you call the APIs directly through whatever language you want to, right? That's where it's nice and flexible. And, you kind of pick if you want to use Python or whatever your preferred language is to call the APIs, go for it. But when you call them directly, you got to deal with more stuff like paginating through results if there's a whole bunch of data. I mention that because the PowerShell modules often take care of a lot of that complexity for you. So most people kind of go with the idea of if there's a PowerShell module for it, that's our first choice. And if not, we'll use a REST API. So let's talk about those modules first. There are a set of modules. What I would not do is, decide that you want this one and this one. I would just install them all. And then what you get are these set of commandlets underneath each module. This is not a full list. This is just a few of the most common ones. So for instance, during this session, we're going to look at get Power BI activity event. That's how we get our activities or our audit log. And that one falls under what we call the admin module. The running the commandlets from the management module are much friendlier from a version perspective than the data gateway module that we're going to talk about in a second. If you're still using Windows PowerShell, you can use that with this, or if you have moved to PowerShell Core, that works too. Let me circle back and we'll look at a couple of these URLs here in a little bit. The other module, right, the data gateway module, this one is not as friendly in terms of what you need to run it. You've got to have PowerShell Core and you got to have PowerShell 7 in order to run these. So my recommendation is if you haven't moved off of old Windows PowerShell, and if you're still using kind of the dark blue interface for PowerShell, right, and it's like if you're on a Windows machine, it's the ISE. If that's still your environment, you need to move to PowerShell Core and use a tool, like Visual Studio Code or whatever. Today, you're going to see Azure Data Studio here in a minute because that's the future. Windows PowerShell is going to be alive and around and kicking for a long time. But, for the last year or two, it hasn't gotten any new features and it's, on a deprecation path. Okay, so let's look at running a few things using this management module. So let me pop out and I have here a Azure Data Studio notebook. And it's specifically a Jupyter notebook. So you can see its file extension here is IPYNB. And so what this is giving us, if you haven't started using notebooks a lot, they're very cool because I can alternate between This here is just a text cell, right? That I can give you some notes, and then I can start alternating between here's some text and here's some code. Now, I am going to actually skip past these first few in the to kind of save a little time. But if you're brand new to all of this, these first few things will kind of, help you figure out what you have and what's going on. But I'm gonna kind of skip to the nuts and the bolts. And there are two ways that you can authenticate in order to start getting back data. So the first way is you have a domain account, and that domain account has Power BI administrator permissions to execute all the admin APIs. And so the gist of it is, if you have a really advanced user that's not an administrator, but feels comfortable, slinging a little PowerShell or whatever, they can absolutely run these scripts using their own permissions. But you need to be an administrator to get that tenant-wide look of what's all the activity happening in the organization, right? That tenant-wide metadata or a tenant-wide inventory list. All right, so here's just a little script for logging in as a domain user. And then as of December, so a couple months ago, we got some new functionality. We now can also run the admin APIs as a service principal. So I gave you a little bit of info here about how to go about setting it up, and where the syntax is just a little bit different. I can't run everything that I want to run using a service principal yet. It's got a subset of admin APIs that it supports. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to proceed with the rest of these demos, logging in with a domain account. Now, if you have trouble with this, the domain account that you use here can't have multi-factor authentication enabled. So you using your own personal account, even if you're a Power BI administrator, might not work. All right, so let me use that for a demo address and put in my password. I set this up here as a prompt so that we're not even tempted to save passwords in our scripts, because we all know that's a bad habit. Okay, so the notebook here tells me that, yep, I'm logged in. Life is good. Let me carry on. I'm going to skip past authenticating as a service principal because we don't need that since we just logged in as me. Now, if we start looking at this first example is a get Power BI workspace, and I want to see the first two. And what's happening here is it's just using my user scope. So what workspaces do I have permission to see? And, it shows me, oh, there's an IT operations group and a device telemetry data. Okay, fine. I can also specify specifically, I want to see one particular workspace, sales analytics. Now, the reason that I'm showing this is because this is the metadata that gets pulled back if I use my user scope. But I want to use my fancy organizational scope. So here's the exact same thing that we just ran, except I'm setting the scope here to organization. This is the thing that requires administrator permissions. Notice that even though I'm still asking for the same one workspace, I get more stuff. I get more metadata, and I always get the set of users that are assigned permissions to that particular workspace. Don't forget, this is my demo account. I only have 2 users, so there won't be a lot of data there for users. Yours would, of course, show a lot more people there under users in all likelihood. So this guy right here unlocks more metadata for you. Here is just kind of a secondary example where I'm still using that same commandlet of a get Power BI workspace, my scope of organization. I'm adding a where statement. I'm saying I only want to see my active workspaces, and I want to format it as a table, and I only want to see these particular items. So the reason I'm doing this and kind of formatting it to look at it on screen is so that I can show you that we can start pulling things like, oh, I can actually see the existence of personal groups, which is My Workspace. I can see, oh, okay, here is a group. This is an Office 365 group, or I should say Microsoft 365 now, and it is not yet migrated to be a version 2 new workspace experience. So if it says workspace, we know those are version 2 upgraded. So I can start identifying which items still need to be migrated. All right, let's look at a little bit of additional workspace artifact info. So here I'm changing. I'm going to do a Get Power BI dashboard. And I'm doing scope organization. So I see all the dashboards in my company. Now I sort by name. Now, here's one interesting thing that you got to note. You see, I've got a call center dashboard listed once, and I've got it listed a second time because it's also included in an app. So you always get this little app prefix for the secondary copies. That's, relatively new in the last few months. So that's interesting. But on this list, nowhere do I see what workspace does this dashboard belong to. So although things like Get Power BI Dashboard or Get Power BI Report are useful, what is more useful is to do something like this, where we do a Get Power BI Workspace. And just to do an exact kind of example that aligns with what we just did, I want to do include dashboards. So that is going to give me better information than I got with the previous example. So underneath, because I did a Get Power BI Workspace, I got those users information. Underneath that, because I asked for my dashboards, here's each one of my dashboards, and it's underneath, this JSON is structured, so it's underneath the workspace that it belongs to, right? So you basically have the lineage. All right. The last thing we want to look at this point is how to export a workspace inventory. And, this example here, I'm just kicking it out to a demo output path. Let me go ahead and run that. What I'm doing is a little bit of date time math here. And that is because what I am doing when I output this is we're going to do this first from the commandlet and then from the API. So that's why from commandlet is here in the name. And then I've got the date and the time of when I extracted this data. So if you start pulling your workspace objects, say every Friday or something like that, you've got that metadata in your file name of, oh, this is exactly when I pulled that data, right? And we can always parse that as well. So this is basically all of my workspace objects across my whole tenant. And if I go down to the bottom, right, even in my small demo tenant, I've got 2,500 rows. All right, so there's kind of our initial baby step into what the commandlets are and what we can get from those. So let's shift gears for a second and talk about the REST APIs. The REST APIs have categories as well. There's more of them. And so here's the thing that you've got to know is that there's a whole lot more capabilities directly through the APIs than there are through the PowerShell modules. And there's a whole lot of stuff we can do in the Power BI user interface in the service that we can't do through an API. So for instance, if you come from, say, the Azure side of things, it's not uncommon for Azure documentation to say, oh, you can do this via an API or via PowerShell, but it's not exposed in the user interface. The methodology in Power BI is the opposite. The user interface is always the priority because at its core, it's a self-service tool, right? So the automation pieces always come after the user interface items. I can think of like maybe one exception that I know of. All right. The other thing you got to know if you start looking at APIs, and so let's say, for instance, you start looking at the API references and you're like, I want to get a list of reports. And you quickly find that there are 2, 4, 6 flavors of getting a list of reports back. And that's because it's based on a couple things. One is if it's a user scope or an admin scope, right? And user scope is really just, it's gonna be based on the executing person's permissions, as opposed to the admin API means, hey, I'm allowed to get this tenant-wide data, even if I don't have any permissions to the content itself, right? This is just metadata after all. And then the scope also is, am I going to go after my workspace or a standard workspace? Am I going to go after one report or all reports? And so really for the purposes that we are talking about here, this get reports as admin is really the one that we want in most cases. Now, the other thing I want to do is give you a quick theoretical walkthrough of what I'm about to show you in the demo, and that is the simplest way we can handle authentication. If you go after the APIs directly, authentication is just a little bit harder. And so the easiest way for you to get started is this. You saw in our earlier demo, if I go way back up here to the top, you saw, and I didn't really highlight it and I shouldn't, so I'm glad I circled back. We used a commandlet called connect Power BI service account. And there's, by the way, a bunch of aliases for this. So if you see like login, Power BI service, et cetera, but this is kind of the base one. We want to keep using that. So we want to actually start our authentication using the management module. And then what we want to do is use what we kind of think of as the Swiss Army knife inside the management module. And it's a commandlet itself, but it's a commandlet that says, I want to invoke a REST method, or that is, I want to call an API. And then basically you've got to pass it the URL. And so, you kind of figure out from the documentation how you want to construct the URL. Groups, by the way, is what the API calls workspaces. The newest APIs have started calling them workspaces. The older APIs still call them groups. Inside the commandlet, by the way, if you see folders, that means workspaces as well. It doesn't really mean folders. Okay, then we start like a parameter section, right? And then we've got certain required parameters. And then there's this magical expand. And it's basically, in this example, we're saying, give me all of the workspaces or groups with the old vernacular. Give me all the workspaces inside the entire tenant, and also give me all of these items inside it as well. Once we've constructed the URL and we've basically passed it inside the context of this commandlet, then we just go on and we keep doing our normal stuff. So we're going to see an example of exactly this. The only other heads up that I have to give you before we look at it for real is, because I'm using PowerShell, in the documentation online, you always see $ for parameters for calling the API. Well, inside of PowerShell, $signs are a special thing. They are PowerShell PowerShell parameters. So we always have to replace them with #24. All right, so let's take a look at calling an API. So here, what we're doing, here is my invoke Power BI REST method. I'm passing it the URL and I'm constructing the URL here. And I'm using this magical expand parameter. And what that's doing, and it's very important to do in a big, busy tenant, is because it's going to minimize the number of API calls. So if you have any existing scripts that are like, say, doing something like looping and running over and over and over and over, you're going to very possibly start to run into API limits. So here's, just the data coming back. We don't really need to look at it. It's just kind of illustrating that I got the equivalent of what we did earlier with a commandlet. This time I just did it through an API. And this next example, I'm doing the exact same thing, but I'm just exporting it. And so here basically is how you figure out which one came from the commandlet that we ran first and which one came from the API. And the results are formatted a little bit differently when they come back from the API. It's much more compressed. when we pull it from the commandlet, see how it puts in a lot more page breaks. It makes it more human readable. So this is a lot more compressed, which is actually kind of nice. And there's one or two other teensy tiny differences, but like 99% of it is straight up equivalent to each other. All right, so what you've seen so far, to kind of start to put together some pieces, right? You've seen that we can pull data two ways, one straight from PowerShell and one from the APIs. For our purposes, we're keeping it simple and doing authentication through the management module, which is what this row represents right here. If you were not going to use the management module at all and you're going to do regular OAuth authentication, your invoke REST method would just not have Power BI inside of it. And that's because this guy right here is really a commandlet from the management module. The PowerShell commandlets make it easier to get started, right? And it's just, a little bit easier. The API side, though, it gets new things a little bit faster, right? And it's one less layer of obfuscation. So I've had one customer along the way that has said to me, well, Melissa, we don't know that we really want to get locked into using PowerShell. So we're okay calling the APIs with PowerShell, but make sure that you always use, the API URL and not the PowerShell commandlet so that if we want to change languages later, we can do that pretty easily because all we need to do is call the URL, through a different language. And that's only happened to me once. But if you have a really strong dev shop in your organization, they might like being a little more pure on the API side. All right, so activity events. So we've seen so far just kind of getting our workspace data. So let's go after this gold data, the activity events. And there are, 130, 40-ish of them. I listed kind of the most common ones here and in the most common categories. But this stuff is really important. There are a whole bunch of different ways that you can go after the activity events. The one that I am going to show you and that I strongly suggest you start with unless you have a good reason to do something different is the newest PowerShell commandlet called Get Power BI Activity Event. The other alternatives, like getting it out of Microsoft 365. So let's see, bullet number 3 here is that UI that we saw a little bit ago. So we know that that's not a really good purpose for automation. The Microsoft 365 Management API has been around for a long time. It used to be the way that we got this data. If you also want to go after data from, say, SharePoint and Exchange and Teams, right? Getting at from the Microsoft 365 Management API might be more efficient for you because you kind of go after it in one go, but you need elevated permissions. If we've integrated Cloud App Security with Power BI Service, we do actually see the audit data over there. But the documentation says that, quote, most audit log data is included. I don't know yet what might be missing from Cloud App Security, so I don't really use it for this purpose. But it is a place to view it. Then we've got the old PowerShell commandlet, and this is the one that I want to call out. It's old. It has some flaws. There's some blogs out there that have a good bit of Google juice because they've been around for years and gotten a whole lot of hits. You don't want to use that approach anymore. So if you have anything still running under this search unified audit log, you want to get that switched to Get Power BI Activity Event. And then finally, like Power BI Sentinel, if you're a customer of theirs, they will pull it for you and they pull it using the Microsoft 365 Management API. Okay, so let's take a quick look at what this looks like. And let's first look at some activity events for one day. And so I've got a prompt here and I just want to look at, I did a few things this morning. So let's see if I do today what I get back. Now, when you're automating this, you never really want to do today. You always want to do through like yesterday or maybe even 2 days ago. Oh yeah, nothing's showing up. Beautiful. The reason for that is because there's a delay and the documentation says that Power BI data should hit the audit log within 30 minutes. And so I can tell you here, it's been 2 or 3 hours and it's still not showing up. So I think if I recall the last time I demoed this, January 27th has some dates. And in this example, I'm looking for one thing, and I'm looking for a share report event. The other thing to know when you're getting started, by the way, it's very, very, very picky about the parameters. So here's our share event. We're going to look at this again in a minute when you can see it a little bit easier. So let's do this instead. This next script, because what you really want to do is you want to export the data and you want to stick it in a data lake or something, right? I have this set up to say, let's go back and get the last 7 days worth of data and let's go stick it in my demo output. And so when it starts landing, we're going to start seeing there's data from the 23rd with a suffix of when I pulled the data, right? We can always go 30 days back and we can pull the data again, hence the date time suffix. What I want to do though, really, is just kind of go through and show you what some of this data looks like. So the first example here is actually export activity events. So the exact thing that we're doing right now is a logged operation. And it's actually a little bit of a noisy logged operation. But that's good, right? So if anybody else in your company has gotten permission to do this, you kind of know if you've got 4 of you pulling the same data, that sort of thing. Here's a view report operation. So we can see that the item name for this one is a usage metrics report. What workspace does it live in? What data set does it live in, etc. This one is interesting because I can see that I looked at it through a workspace and I looked at it through the web as opposed to say through a mobile app. The next view report operation is a little bit different in that the distribution method is through an app. So that's really good information to figure out for the people that can see data, or the reports I should say, through an app and through workspaces, which one are they actually using more? The next example here is a create report example. And so we can see here that I created a report called Marketing Teams in the Regional Expansion Project workspace. I've got a create dataset event, and oh, looky, it's Marketing Teams, Regional Expansion Projects. You can tell from that, oh, I published a PBIX with the dataset and the report in the same file, in the same workspace. Here I did an edit dataset properties, and we can see that the certification was changed to promoted, or it says dataset certification stage. This is your dataset endorsements. So this is another situation where the metadata label is just a little bit weird. I've got an update app here. So we can see that basically who did this? This particular user republished the app that's associated for a workspace. Here is a good one that you always want to track, export artifact. So we can see, if I scroll down just a little bit further, I can see that I exported a report and I exported it to a PowerPoint format. So that's really useful information to see what people are doing. Here's a good one that is analyzed by external application. And so this one here, I can tell because it's the MS OLAP 15 client, I used Analyze in Excel. And I did it against a data set called sales data. So that's really good information. Who's using Excel, which is fine, especially if they use it against an existing shared data set. Here's a really good one, and I have a blog on my site about this actually. Updated admin feature switch means somebody changed a tenant setting. And so the tenant setting that was changed was published to web and it was switched to false. And so on my website, I've got a little write-up about, hey, if you wanted to be alerted every time somebody changed a tenant setting, one way that you could go about doing that. So anyways, I hope that gives you kind of a good idea of what kind of data you can get. So I've got like 3 minutes left here of getting started tips, and then we'll open it up for the rest of the time for Q&A. So a few of these you've kind of heard from me. So let me just reiterate a few things. One is a lot of this, what you're going to be doing in terms of collecting the data is you're also going to create some KPIs and figure out, well, what's important and what are you actually measuring? And sometimes that directly correlates to what you see people doing that you either like or don't like. You have a big decision about how to handle authentication, since the service principal authentication, which is technically a better security practice, doesn't let you get after as much data as using a domain account. You might still find yourself, if your IT security folks allow it, creating kind of a service account that is used for these types of scheduled operations, right? And that service account is Power BI Administrator. So it's an evolving situation, though, kind of one of those watch this space items, I would think. You heard me say this earlier, if you're not already grabbing all that activity log data, even if you're not ready to start parsing it and building a data model and building reports, just start getting the history. When you use that commandlet to get the activity events, we can go back a maximum of 30 days. So definitely just start accumulating it and start tucking it away for when you are ready. After you've done that, you want to start accumulating your workspace snapshots. I like weekly. And here's where you got to start being really careful if you have a really big tenant with a lot of stuff. There are 3 different ways you can go after it. We saw the first 2 in a demo. And this third one is actually brand new. And I haven't had a chance to fully test it, so I did not include it in the demos yet. But I gave you a link so that you can find the info about it. What you want to do when you pull that raw data, and this is something that I see people in their blogs do a lot, is, they kind of say, oh, I want report name, and I want dashboard name, and I want workspace name, right? They're deciding ahead of time what data they want. And I don't want you to ever filter the data down, and I don't want you to format it either. And that's because you're always got something new sneaking in. We can only go back 30 days. If you get yourself set up to where you're only pulling the raw data, archiving it somewhere safe, you've got all the flexibility that you need. And on that note, what you want to do with that raw data is put it in a very secure location. And if you have formal auditing needs or formal compliance needs, right, that your auditors you're going to need to give audit support, what works well is that raw data goes into an immutable location, meaning nobody, once that file is written, can edit it or delete it. That gives you the flexibility of relying on it for formal auditing if you need to. And then you can always go back and reparse that data, reload the data, pick up something that you didn't even know existed, but oh, turns out it was released 3 months ago. We want that data. It gives you that flexibility. This recommendation kind of falls under the easier said than done category, but it's easy to start collecting it and shoving it away. It's harder and more effort to say, let's figure out what our normal baseline is. Let's figure out, when we need to actually take action, and having a Power BI administrator or whomever is, charged with working with this data, actually able to take the time to do something with it, right? Easier said than done. And then we talked about this earlier, right? But once it's ready, there's no reason why you couldn't release these reports for others to view. There are those built-in usage metric reports. By default, it's 1 report at a time that the service creates them. But we can create something that's far more powerful, even though it certainly does take some effort. So hopefully you're walking away from this presentation with an appreciation that we've got a ton of metadata available to us from the activity log and the REST APIs, even though you only saw a couple REST APIs, and that it's critical for a whole bunch of different purposes that can really be valuable to us. Before we open it up to Q&A, I just want to point out that there's a bunch of links down here. So here are links that are directly from me. So, particularly the one at the top of where to find the presentation materials. Release plan items to watch. I listed these two here, kind of directly relate to the topics we've been talking about. This one here doesn't say that it's done, but there's a blog post from like last week. I think they hit this one early, but I'm not 100% sure that everything in here has been addressed. So I left it on the list. Then I've given you a variety of learning resources. So you might decide to just say, we're just going to run PowerShell in a virtual machine and keep it simple. But if you want to use something like Azure Data Factory, Joost has a really good example that he posted just the other day. So this one's kind of hot off the presses. Tom Martins recently published something similar using Azure Automation. And Gilbert has one that he published a little while back, and he uses Azure Functions. And so you'll see each one of them has a little bit different technique that they use for going after the data, but, you know, looking at how other people do this is always great from a learning perspective. I saw Chris Webb with a tweet just, in the last week or so, and Nassim here is his coworker, and Chris tweeted out that this is a new starter kit that he put on GitHub, and I have not had a chance to review it, but it looks like it's got some really interesting information in there. There are a few other things, like Ted Pattinson has a few different things from DevCamp Labs that he's been running. I noticed at least the last one I watched is using Windows PowerShell. So my suggestion is that you start to move away from that, but he still has lots of good tips. Brett Powell, if you follow him, he's always got really good information from an automation perspective. Parker has this 4-part series. I think it's really great from a learning perspective. My opinion is that it's not a production ready solution, but it's a great learning series to go through. Aaron here has a whole bunch of different stuff in his GitHub account. Adam and Patrick and Guy in a Cube, I pulled out just a couple of the ones that I think are most relevant on their channel. And then the last thing, throughout the slide deck, you saw a variety of links in the footers. Hopefully I caught them all. They should all be here at the end for you in just one place, so you can kind of start, diving in and figuring this crazy world out. When you do that, definitely allow plenty of time if this is a new space for you, because it gets kind of complex and takes some time. So tell your project manager you need twice as long as you think you need. And with that, Mark and Mikael, I am ready to turn it over to Q&A.
Perfect. Thanks for this walkthrough. And we have a bunch of questions here. First one is that you talk about certified data sets. Yeah. Who or what does this certification of the data sets?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked. I am going to publish a blog and a video about this exact thing next week. But to give you the super short version of the answer, right? What we can do in, I went to my reporting workspace. Let me go to my data workspace. So we can now certify data sets, data flows, reports, dashboards, and apps as a whole. So the first thing, like if you're kind of just starting down the road of certification, and the feature name is actually endorsements, you really want to start thinking about it from the data side, because we like people to reuse data as they're creating their new reports, right? So starting with data is the place to start. And so it's basically for each of the objects that you want to certify, except for the app, which is kind of in a different spot, right? You've got these 2 levels of endorsements, promoted and certified. And what I'm going to elaborate on in my video next week is kind of thinking about it from this perspective. When you certify data, what you're doing is you're telling your downstream report creators, you can take a dependency on this data set. It is trustworthy. And that means you have to go through and you have to figure out what this is, right? What it means to you. You have to go through a process to say, okay, what does certified mean, right? That, oh, we've validated it and it's gone through change management and, et cetera, et cetera. And so if you certify a report, it's more about, hey, the consumers of this report can trust the data that's being displayed. And then certifying an app, which is a collection of items, is a whole nother thing. So I'm going to talk about all that in a blog and a video next week. So I won't take up more time with that since it's a little bit of a left turn from our topic, but it's a really important topic that that if you're not spending a lot of time on endorsements yet, I recommend that you do.
Right. So we've got a question which is quite specific from Kyati Shah. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. Is there any way to find out the most and least active users?
Yeah, absolutely. So the best thing that you would want to do is start capturing all of, so let's say, let me go back to like this thing right here. So every thing that happens, so when you're talking about active users, right? You don't necessarily care what they did. You just want to know that they did something, I guess, is first, and then you might be drilling into, well, was it creating content? Was it editing content? Was it viewing content, right? But to me, that's kind of the secondary level. So every single event has a user ID associated with it. And so the easiest thing you can do is once you've compiled this activity log data, is quite literally pull it into a data model and just count events by user, right? And then there's always a creation time as well. So you do your date magic, right? And then start saying, by day, by week, by month, et cetera. And then from there, you can start, classifying operations. Incidentally, one thing that I didn't pull up a bunch of links, but I should show you, and it is in your links. The documentation has, when you kind of get down partially on the page, has a list of operations available in the audit and activity logs. This is always out of date, but it's the best list that there is in terms of documentation. And so what I have done before, and I think is very useful from a reporting perspective, is create a table of some sort for yourself and start, basically setting groups for this, right? And then you can start slicing and dicing by add events and edit events and delete events and that kind of thing, because there's no native way to do that. You'd kind of have to create that yourself.
So when getting data from different sources, is it only the time that connects the data? And what if things happen in different time zones? Do we have time synchronization so we can see what is going on actually?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. So it's always logged in UTC time. So you won't have to worry about synchronizing time zones. What you would maybe worry about is what time zone do you present on a report to a user, right? And would you want to convert it? Really what I do, and even what you'll see if you started, kind of looking in these scripts here, how I put the date time suffix in the files that we export. My functions here to do that, I also do those in universal time so that I don't have some of my data in local time and some in UTC time. I just kind of have gotten used to it being 4 or 5 hours offset based on where I live. So yeah,
so this
I
is
think if you...
Advantage Mark from the UK then.
There you go. There you go.
Right. So next question. Is the Power BI REST API methods, or should I say, are they identical regardless of whether you are querying the Power BI service or the premium service? Are there any differences querying it when it's embedded or using the premium per user licensing models?
Okay. So let me think about that for a second here. So you have this in your information. So here's your API reference, right? And so, for instance, if you go under admin, there's a whole bunch of admin APIs, et cetera. And, these would be the ones that are tenant-wide metadata. And we would have different categories for instance, if we want to know about our capacities. And so in terms of, needing a different license to run the API, I don't know of any need there for needing, like a PPU or a premium, other than you wouldn't have this kind of data available to query unless you have it. So I think generally speaking, the answer to your question is, nah, as long as you have a pro license and the admin role, you're good.
Cool. Could you just go to the bottom? They mentioned something about embedded at the bottom of that screen that you're on now. I'm just
so there's a separate set of embedding APIs. Right, okay. So yeah, if you were wanting to do that, and interestingly enough, if I go to the Power BI blog, and it shouldn't be very far down because I just saw it, the developer update from just in the last few days had something fantastically interesting. Oh, new API documentation for them. But this is the one I thought was interesting. Track your user clicks with visual clicked event. And so that's talking about, which specific visual was clicked. In the regular APIs, we can't get that. But it's over here in the embedded APIs. And so I don't know yet what that means in terms of us being able to get it just for regular old auditing and reporting. So that's something I need to dig in.
That's interesting. I mean, that could be a good justification for third-party add-ins, couldn't it? If people, or visualizations, if you track that people aren't using paid visualizations very often.
Yeah, and actually one of those items that I kind of just blew past, whoops, it's right, there we go. Custom visual monitoring is cool. On the release plan with a public preview coming soon. And it's basically all about monitoring the usage of whether it's a custom visual that you got from app source or imported from a file or whatever. So I think that'll be interesting.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So considering we are logging like crazy now, is it possible or even desirable to send the logging data to Custo or some query tool of our choice?
Yeah, that's a good question. So that's not something I have done, but if you have your Azure environment set up to where you can accept that data up in, Azure Data Explorer, and then we run the Custo query language, or KQL, I think is what we're talking about here. So I think that would be another realistic possibility if, in fact, you're kind of familiar with the service and familiar with that particular query language. It's just not something I've done or seen firsthand, but I like the way you're thinking.
Given that the logging data you are sampling converts easily to JSON format, would this be a good use case to store your samples and snapshots into a document database?
Could be, yeah. And that kind of falls again with, if that's what your team is comfortable with from a technology perspective, more so than say just a data lake or a storage account, go for it. I think it might be more expensive. And this is really chatty data, by the way, and it can accumulate to be, every event is super tiny. But if you have thousands of users, you get a lot of data over the course of, a week and a month and so forth. So that might be one consideration.
Cool. And from this perspective, with the REST APIs, is there some kind of Swagger API documentation publicly available? Could we connect to some place and get the auto-generated REST API client?
Maybe. I just searched for something in the last day or two when I was preparing for this, and I saw a Swagger URL. but that's not something I've used personally, so I can't speak to it. But I saw a
it's
reference.
Googleable, at least.
Yeah, but I'm sorry, I don't know offhand how that would work exactly.
Okay, so we had a question from Manoj asking about your Jupyter notebook available for reference. It will be extremely helpful, he says, to let everyone know. I've posted a link to your resources on your blog for this session. I think your notebook is actually in there, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. So if you go and you find this session on my presentations page, and let's try it one more time, see if the GitHub link is a dead duck. So the problem I was fighting with earlier this morning is that even though I cleared out all the data, so see here, here's the actual script, and here's the data output. And so I was monkeying around with clearing the data and re-uploading this notebook. So if you got it from my GitHub account, you're going to see some of my data results for some unimaginable reason. If you get it from this guy right here, and just, open it in Azure Data Studio or whatever Jupyter Notebook, compatible software that you use, that should work. And you shouldn't see, because I cleared the results. I know I did. So
as long as your passwords aren't available in your notebooks,
and I think no passwords. Yep, no passwords. That's why I prompt for them, is just so that I can't ever forget.
A question from Gary. How do you handle schema changes when exporting data activities with the get Power BI activity event?
Yeah, so that is the biggest reason why this right here is so crucial, is because you will have schema changes. And so you basically just say in your script, get the data and dump it out, period. And then you can deal with it in the next step, right? And so it's been a while, and I don't have a script, in case you immediately want to ask. I don't have a script to share because it's been a while and it was for a customer, so I'd have to kind of redo everything. But what we set up from a process perspective is we set it up so that, like, once a week, what we would do is we had a metadata table in this auditing database that said, here's all of the, the key value pairs. Here's all of the attributes, basically, that we know about, and then had it parse through the most recent data sitting over here and say, did anything new come in that isn't sitting in basically my data dictionary? And so we implemented that once, and that's kind of a way that, the schema changed and we find the new stuff. Again, kind of all hand-coded and a pain, I must say, but can be done.
Perfect. Thanks.
Great stuff. So we've got 3 more questions that are not queued up in mine and Mikael's little sheet. So we're going to read these ones, Mikael, directly from the interface. So I'm going to start with Kiarti's one. This is an interesting one that you may struggle to answer in the time we have, but when developers complain Power BI is slow today, as an admin, which places do you look to find a problem?
Oh, geez. Yeah, that's kind of too broad of a question. And, if you're talking about, the data set's slow or the report's slow. And so I think you need to narrow down, is it in the service? Is it in the desktop? Is it the report? And because, there's a lot of bad report design things that you can do that slow it down terribly and make it send a bazillion queries just to show the first page, for instance. And then, of course, there's the whole data model design, and you need a pretty decent data model. And then you've got the whole storage engine, formula engine stuff you can start going into. So yeah, that's a big, big question.
So this is a consulting opportunity, basically.
Yeah, and that's actually not the kind of thing that I do and have deep knowledge in anyways. So there's many, many, many more people in the Power BI community that are far more experienced with that kind of stuff than me. And I want to say there's also, if you go to this beautiful area, the best practice guidance, and this is all stuff that is published by the CAT team. So the customer advisory team, the folks like, the people that you know of in the community, like, Chris Webb and Adam Saxton and Patrick LeBlanc and Matthew Roche and a handful more people that work with the big customers and the tough problems. And I want to say that they put in something. I thought that there was some performance stuff that they put in here. But
Power BI guidance optimization guide, top left.
Yeah. Anyway, so if you're starting to look at, hey, we kind of have a lousy data model, I would look at this kind of stuff. And I would also look at SQL BI's training, and a lot of it's free on kind of just core basic data model fundamentals and good DAX practices, right? Because lousy DAX is in there. So yeah, it could be so many different things.
That's great. Mikael, over to you.
Yeah. So perfect. And all questions, or most questions, were answered within time. I will thank everybody who joined us and stayed until the bitter end.